I wanted to start by talking about this hamburger, which to many of you just probably looks like a tasty hamburger, but I'm going to play to type here a little bit and tell you that I've done some economic research on it. And it turns out that the meat is actually freshly ground with each order, and the lettuce and the tomato are sliced just right before it lands on this bun, which is a lightly buttered brioche toasted bun. It costs $6. But what's most remarkable about it is that the first person who will actually touch the hamburger is the person who orders it and eats it. This is a Creator Burger restaurant. It opened in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, and it makes food through a fully automated process. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it going to create jobs, or is it going to cost jobs? Is it going to expand opportunity, or is it going to further concentration? My name is Sarah Bianchi, and I'd like to thank Third Way for inviting me to speak today and for being a part of this conference, which is in part designed to make sure that that hamburger is not just enjoyed by the person who eats it, but benefits the entire American workforce. The reality is we probably can't outlaw the burger, and we probably shouldn't. We can't outlaw automated cashiers or automated drivers. A century ago, when Henry Ford ramped up the production of the Model T Ford, nobody outlawed that. In fact, it led to a lot of American jobs and middle-class work. But it was really, really very, very bad for the horseshoe industry at the time. And no one could change that. But here's what we can do. We get to choose how we respond to these changes. What we do as a nation in the face of rapidly changing economy to make sure that it works for more people in more places. And how we do that is the greatest economic policy challenge of our time. I come to this discussion not only as a fan of hamburgers, but like many of you, I've worked in a lot of political jobs and policy jobs. I had a job in the Clinton White House, and I worked for Joe Biden in the Obama White House. I've had a job as an investor on Wall Street, and I've worked for Airbnb, a disruptor company. And I have the most important job of all, which is the job of a mother. And in fact, I'm about to hit a very important parenting milestone. My first kid, Eva, is going to turn 10 years old next month, the Decade Club. I actually can barely believe it. It seems like just a few weeks ago she was toddling through our kitchen. But what's actually more unbelievable is how much the world has changed since Eva was born. A year before she arrived, in 2007, 0 smartphones were sold worldwide. In 2016, 1.5 billion were sold, and most of us can't imagine how we get through the day without one. Like Eva, Airbnb is also about to have its 10th birthday. 10 years ago, Airbnb had 50 rooms available, and Brian Chesky and his co-founders were desperately trying to figure out how to fund the company. They had been rejected by a lot of investors. And so as a last-ditch effort, they came up with a gimmick to sell cereal boxes at the 2008 Democratic Convention. Captain McCain and Obama O's. It wasn't actually these cereal boxes that did the trick themselves for funding, but there was one last venture capital investor who thought, if these guys will do that, they will do anything to make their company succeed. They are, as we say at Airbnb, serial entrepreneurs. And they were actually right, this investor. There's now more than 4 million Airbnb listings worldwide, enough to house everyone in Iowa and New Hampshire. There are more Airbnb listings today than at Hilton, where we are, which is 99 years old. Sheridan, 85 years old, Best Western, 70 years old. Marriott, 61 years old. And Hyatt, also 61 years old. These 5 hotel chains have more than 350 years of operations. And they have fewer hotel rooms, or fewer rooms than a company that wasn't around a decade ago. Eva doesn't know a world without Uber or Lyft. She doesn't know what Borders bookstore is. She still doesn't quite get what all those film strips are that we keep in the back of our photo albums or what they do. But Border had 700 bookstores and 36,000 employees. We're not reading less, we're reading different. We're buying differently. Borders is virtually gone. Amazon has new stores, but they don't have cashiers. Kodak is gone because our phone does everything that our camera did and a lot more. Lodging without hotels. Ride-hailing without cabs. Books without paper. Cameras without film. Stores without storefronts and cashiers, and cars, and soon enough, cars and trucks without drivers. It's a lot of change. And it's coming faster and faster. It's actually not a surprise at all that Americans are feeling pretty anxious. We don't really know, any of us, what's coming next. So I'm going to talk about the future and how it's changing work, but I want to start with one overarching point, which is that work is not vanishing, by and large, it's changing. There's more people employed in the United States today than any time in our history. And we're adding jobs, and by and large, we'll continue to add jobs. In fact, sometimes the industries that were disrupted actually are adding jobs. So take Airbnb again. This is the number of hotel jobs since Airbnb launched, and as you can see, it's going up. In fact, there's 100,000 more hotel jobs than there were at the time. They're different kind of jobs. They're hosting conferences like this, presentations. I tried to convince Third Way that we could all be sitting in one big cozy Airbnb, but it didn't seem to make sense. The hotel jobs are different, though. They have different skills. And at the same time, there's this whole other group of people who are Airbnb in their home, and they're making, on average, a typical Airbnb host in this country makes about $7,000 a year. That's real money. That's a real raise for people who really need it. But I'm not here to tell you that all disruption is additive. Of course, that's not true. But it's also not a zero-sum game. Work's going to be there, but it's going to be really different. So I want to talk about 7 themes about the future of how it's changing. And the first theme is that the future is going to favor education. This is not new. Future has favored education for a long time in this country. We've already seen the trend, and it's going to grow. If you look from 1979 till today, the only group who on average got a pay raise is the third of workers who have a college degree or more. For everybody else, wages, if you adjust for inflation, has fallen. So what does that mean? It means we need to enable more people to get the credentials that they need to get good jobs, high incomes, growing wages. We need to find a way to boost the take-home pay for people who don't have a college degree. Those are policy choices, or choices that a nation could make. The pace of change is rapid, and almost every industry is going to see some type of upheaval, which means nearly every job is going to probably have some type of change. If you continue on my beef theme, there's nothing about this cow that looks particularly different than a picture of a cow we might have seen 10, 20, 50 years ago. But in fact, it's got a collar with a GPS device that monitors where it's going and sends electronic signals if it's straying to the wrong place. And within 2 days, it can train the cow not to stray past the border. So as you'll see, this farm does not need a fence. So who thought that the next industry to be disrupted would be the farm fence industry, which is actually a $300 million annual industry? If you think about how long disruptive technologies of the last century took to get disrupted, If you look at electricity, that's 46 years for 25% adoption. Radio, 31. Television, 26. The internet, 7. Google voice recognition went from 75% to 95% in 3 years. So what does this mean for work? We don't live in a world anymore where it makes sense to start life and get 12 years of education or even 16 or 20 and then get none anytime thereafter. We need an education system that makes it easy to train and evolve and retrain. Lawyers, and I know there's a lot of them here, you're going to have to learn to do contracts on the blockchain and have to change ways that we litigate cases. Maybe Alexa is not only going to wake us up and answer super random questions, she might become America's favorite witness in the courtroom. Capital matters. This is what they taught me on Wall Street. So if you imagine two twins born in 1964, and they each given $5,000, and one parent gets to invest and the other gets to invest. So the other one, the dad says, I want this kid to work. What I'm going to do is I am going to invest this fund that matches wage gains for the average worker. And the mom says, I like work too, but for this kid, I'm going to put the $5,000 in the stock market fund, in a fund that matches the S&P. From 1964 to 1985, you'll see that the returns on labor and capital are basically the same, and then in the 90s, it starts to change, and then it really, really starts to change. So the $5,000 invested in 1964 in labor is now worth about $45,000 in 2018. And the same $5,000 in the stock market is $870,000. And almost all of that split comes after the digital age that begins in the 90s. So this raises some super important questions about sibling rivalry. It clearly makes the point of why we need more women in investing. But it also raises important policy questions. How do you make sure that Americans can benefit from this blue line, whether it's through retirement, higher ed, savings, all of these things, and how do we figure out something that can get that stubborn orange line, wages, moving upward again? Capital, of course, is also central to business growth. And yet, most of the capital and investment is concentrated in particular areas. In fact, 70% of venture capital takes place in 3 states. And my friend Ron Klain, who I think is here, goes on a bus around with Rise of the Rest to try to find other ventures in other places. That's part of why we're seeing such uneven growth in this country. In fact, about 3% of the counties produce more than half of the job growth since 2008, half. There's Brian Chesky's in Ohio. The guy's from upstate New York. They're in Iowa, Nevada, and they need the same type of support. Policies change that too. The recent Opportunity Zone legislation, championed by Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat, and a Republican, Tim Scott, and lots of investors and venture capitalists, gives tax breaks to invest in funds that are dedicated in underserved areas. That's a good start. And I know Third Way's done a lot of policy work in this area with an American investment bank that's trying to get more risk capital into widely distributed in the economy. These are policies we can make, and they'll make a big difference. We also should recognize that global competition is relevant to all segments of the economy and prepare accordingly. So we all know the story a few decades ago of when China got into manufacturing to compete with the United States and became a powerhouse, and we lost a lot of factory jobs. But now they're looking towards high-tech and high-end services. And just 5 years ago, only 2 of the top 20 largest tech companies were Chinese. And today, if you look at the list, it's almost half. As Chinese companies compete with Amazon, Google, Facebook, we have to maintain and expand our innovative culture in the United States. The one that encourages somebody to look at that cow and think, you know what we don't need anymore is those white fences. But we also need an education system that's fit for the internet age. 15 years ago, the United States produced 5,000 more science and engineer PhDs annually than China. And now China produces 2,500 more than us a year. US education, math, and science, and engineers got to keep pace. So back to Eva. Buying online has skyrocketed since she was born. In 2007, about 1 in every $20 in retail was bought online. And last year, it's 1 out of every $8. In my house, it's, I think, about 1 out of every $1 or $2. And e-commerce is increasing by about 15% a year, and it's going to continue to do that. And online inflation is less than offline inflation, in part because we can price compare from the comfort of our own home. So it's not particularly surprising that one of the results of this is that transportation and moving and logistics, and all are going to be a huge growth area. 5 years ago, the volume of packages in the United States has gone from about 7.5 billion to 11.5 billion. When I was a kid, and the packages arrived in our home, it was like excitement. It was like Christmas. We all gathered around, opened it. Even her brother hop, skop, and jump over the thousands of boxes that come to my house. They're just boring household goods. She's far more excited to walk down the aisle of a store on the rare occasion that we'll take her to one. It's aisles of wonders of just stuff. Much better than Peapod. But my family's just a microcosm of what's going on in the retail industry in this country. A huge source of employment, steadily declining. And work and logistics and distribution steadily climbing. Different jobs, different skills, a lot of anxiety. For a long time, businesses invested more in like things, stores, buildings, factories, machines, tools, shopping malls. Now they're spending on intangible assets, not tangible assets. Uber doesn't own cars, it owns an app. Hilton, 5,200 hotels. Airbnb, a website, an app. Airbnb and Uber are connecting people to other people. That's their job, to leverage things that the people already own. Companies are spending more on connectivity and less on content. But that's just not Silicon Valley. If Walmart wanted to sell more things, it used to open a new store. They'd figure out where to put it, build the building, get the lease, a lot of stuff, figure out how many hire workers, all of these. Now, they use an app and a software to expand their sales. They scale up, they can scale down. It's what every industry is doing. This trend also leads to an emphasis on investors who don't really worry as much about collateral. They're willing to cherry pick the idea from Silicon Valley rather than build a new store in Des Moines. This too fuels the concentration of wealth and capital and opportunity. On the other hand, e-commerce means you can sell anything from anywhere. If you think about Etsy, 28% of the sales are from people selling things from rural areas. They're mostly women. They get to pick when they work. Before that, we probably didn't have access to those products. But of course, that only works if we have e-commerce, high-speed internet everywhere in this country. They can purchase things and sell things and earn the life they want. And of course, perhaps most importantly, this is all fundamentally changing the way that we work. There's 7 million Americans in the on-demand workforce. That's triple of 4 years ago. Uber drivers, Etsy sellers, people who, thank goodness, can now assemble that IKEA furniture and walk the dog. Today, most of these a la carte workers have another job. In fact, they usually just make about a quarter of their income off this a la carte or gig work. I think 2/3 of Uber drivers have another job. That's true today. We don't know what will look like in the future, but we do know that this trend is part of a larger trend going on in the workforce. Larry Katz and Alan Kruger have done research on this, and they found that over the past decade, lots of contingent workers are being hired. It's grown by about a half, and they're about 16% of the workforce, a lot of the new jobs since the recession. Freelancers, independent contractors. But this, of course, raises many important issues as well. The first, of course, is that the benefits that workers have gotten from healthcare, retirement, unemployment, they're not always available in these arrangements. They leave workers and families quite vulnerable. And there's also a lot less stability in the workplace. You change jobs, employers are less loyal, the skills change, training, all these things that we used to get from the workforce, that's not happening there anymore. So these are all massive, once-in-a-lifetime trends, and they're changing work. But we have to remember that we're still adding jobs. We've been adding jobs continuously from the dawn to the digital age until now. And our task as Democrats is to make sure that this change works for people and not against them. The challenge of our day is to make sure that this cheeseburger doesn't just benefit the people who eat it or the people who invest in it, but the whole economy. It's a daunting task, but it's an exciting task, and it's a doable task. And if Democrats are the people trying to figure out that, I believe that it will be a winning task for our party. Thank you.